Good evening, everyone. We are so glad that you're here. This is our first ever episode of Behind the Exhibit. This is a program we hope to do more often as we get new exhibits here at the Ventura Museum. And tonight I am delighted to be here with Jorge Corralejo. Jorge is a nationally known activist, advocate, I think is what he most identifies with, and business leader. And he is notable for many, many, many reasons. But tonight we're going to talk to him as the driving force behind our current main exhibit here at the Ventura Museum, Huelga, which is the history of strikes here in Ventura County and actually across the nation, and his time working with the union and union leaders. So before I launch into my first question for you, I want to let everybody at home know that we would love to take your questions. Jorge and I are going to talk for, 30, 40 minutes. And then, I'm looking at the wrong camera. Okay. Hi, everybody. We're going to talk for 30, 40 minutes, but please put your questions either in the Q&A in Zoom or in the chat, or if you're on Facebook, put them in there. Our Deputy Director, Denise Sindelar, is tracking everything, and she will be reading out your questions in about 35, 40 minutes. So, but first I get to ask the questions. So let's just start big picture. This exhibit is it's a lot of things here in this exhibit, but the center of it is your photographic reporting of your time working with the UFW. So why don't you just tell us about how you got involved with the UFW first here in Ventura County?
Most certainly. Well, I'll tell you, I was in high school when the Bracero program was terminated. And so that left a lot of a void in the agricultural industry here, and the growers were continued to hire undocumented workers. Nevertheless, they went to some of the schools to see if they could gather some students to work. And I thought to myself, growing up in Moore Park, well, work is work. As a sophomore in high school, why not? So I did. I went to work picking oranges and picking lemons, and I learned a lot from that experience. I also, in the summertime, I worked at Egg City, the largest egg production facility in the nation as well. But what I learned was, one, how difficult the work was, but two, the dehumanization of the workers that were treated, the immigrants, and the humiliation that they had to undergo. So I just couldn't take it. So I internalized what was going on with these folks. And I became very conscious of the farm workers movement, and tried to figure out ways that I could possibly assist as a student. So I became somewhat of an advocate in high school, not very popular, but nevertheless, people weren't familiar with farm workers. They were absolutely not familiar with the attempts to organize farm workers. However, when farm workers went on strike in Oxnard, I ran over and joined as a volunteer to do whatever I might possibly do. And so I was sent on the strike lines with the strikers to get people out, convince the esquiroles, the strike breakers from working, to draw them out of the fields. But the fortunate thing is that I had a camera, and I was able to record these historical events, which I would have never known they would have value, but I did that. And so I had internalized the struggle of the UFW, got to meet Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, saw what magnificent forces they were for the organization. And at the same time, the Chicano movement, and the Black movement, the environmental movements, the anti-war movements were all being energized. And then I went to college. And
wait, let me stop you before you get to college. So let me try to establish when this is. So the grape strikes in Delano, right, were 1965 to 1970. Yes. So do you remember when you scurried over to Oxnard to really be part of the it wasn't even the UFW then, I don't think, but part of the.
That's correct. They were the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, but many workers went on strike here in Oxnard in the late 60s.
Late 60s.
Late 60s. And so I ran over and I joined with the union as volunteers. So I went to join the strikers. And on the exhibit here, there's some strike lines and so forth that show the early days in Oxnard. And this is a young soul farm worker, with, of course, as the farm workers, they had very little and they didn't have any jobs. They were on strike. And, I don't grade my photos, but this still happens to be one of my favorites, Queremos paz y justicia. We want peace and justice. So this is a strike. This is from the original early strike lines when I was on there. As I mentioned, there are other good strike pictures here. If you haven't been to the exhibit, I encourage you all to.
Yeah,
to
I'm
visit.
holding up photos from the exhibit. So the exhibit is mostly Jorge's photos, and then obviously historical interpretation, and then artworks also from both contemporary and historic artists. So let's take a look at this one. Tell us what's happening here.
This is Cesar Chavez, and the head of the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee, later the UFW, and Eliseo Medina, your direction. He was a board member of the Farm Workers Union. They're marching through Moore Park after the workers went on strike at Egg City. That was an interesting development. So it was great that such a later to become the most significant civil rights leader was marching through Moore Park. But there they are, and that's an interesting dynamic because Egg City was, like I said, the largest egg producer in the nation. They produced for most of the supermarkets. They produced for the armed services and so forth. It was an enormous place. And so a lot of the workers that went out on strike, and still about half of them workers stayed as esquirolas, as strike breakers. However, Egg City always had only Anglo-Saxon supervisors, but they had for once hired one to be a supervisor. Now he, as it turns out, his girlfriend was there, and her parents and all their comadres and compadres, they all worked there. So they stayed, about half of them stayed on there. They all knew each other, And so they went on a strike. We were half and half, and there's a photo back there of the workers across the hill marching on strike. And on the Egg City, there's another photo that the museum has. There's an enormous banner that says "Go home, Cesar." And so that we were taking a look at what we could do there. And it turns out the supervisor happened to be a drinking buddy of my brother Robert Butch, we used to call him. His name was Ed Luevano Flores. And so we talked to him and talked him into changing sides. Now, what had happened at that time was the Teamsters intervened. The older ones can remember the Teamsters were scheduling, were signing contracts with growers in order to keep the UFW out, and they were very pro-grower. So they were signing the contract with Egg City. So we convinced Ed to come on out, and he did. He was coming out, and he was bringing all the family, he was bringing all the families out as well. And I said, hey, Ed, wait a minute. Can you bring a copy of the Teamsters agreement? Which he did. So they all came out on strike, joined the strikers, gave me a copy of the Teamsters agreement. I gave it to Cesar, and we knocked them dead. We killed them because we had everyone else there. And so that was a big victory. And Cesar was grateful. I think I loaned, I've got some letters from Cesar. They're not in the exhibit. The museum has them. He's thanking me for the copy of that Teamsters agreement because we tore them apart.
All because of a drinking buddy.
Oh,
See?
my brother,
So
my
that could
brother.
work out.
That's right. You never know the connections. That's right.
Who Butch was drinking with.
Uh-huh.
So one of the things I know you talked to me about was about other unions that came out in support of the then, coming into being the UFW. So this is a photo from Oxnard.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Yes, it is. And, when we were starting with the union, it was difficult because people didn't know about farm workers in general. People did not know about Cesar Chavez. And so how do you bring attention, because we're starting, the strikes, we're starting the boycotts and things that without an organization, how do you know? So I had the idea, why not bring the union people together? I mean, unions are supposed to stick together,
Mhm.
although they didn't officially recognize UFWOC as a union, but we were. And so we talked and got together all of these unions to march down Oxnard Boulevard in Oxnard. It was a big deal to give attention to the UFW and to let them know that we were for real, the strikes existed, it's a labor movement. And so it gave the union credibility in Ventura County. So that was a really big deal.
Jorge, weren't you just a kid at this time?
Well, I was young. Yeah, I was, a teenager.
You were a
late
teenager and you were out. That's why I said advocate is a big part of how you identify. You were out getting other unions involved in building awareness.
It's always I've always been a person to interact with people. So I met with some of these union folks, like Koki Shindo, the teachers union. Tom Jollicure was involved, I believe, with the unions as well. So they were interesting folks. So connect, putting these connections together to bring them all together. The labors came on and so on and so forth. But and then once you get a couple, then more come on and so on and so forth. So we had a great march, and that was a big deal. And so and then Cesar or Philip Veracruz, we became really good friends. He's a Filipino. He was a Filipino vice president of the United Farm Workers Union as well. He's also in the exhibit. And so I brought him down, and a real fiery for Filipino. We're not real fiery people. Filipinos are ourselves, but he was fiery, a real ideologue and really active. So he'd come down, and Cesar would come down. Dolores would come down later. And so I got to know them pretty well. And then at that time, I was making the transition to go to college, and then to college to UC Santa Barbara, and making that transition, and continued even as I was in college, because once I was there, I continued organizing, with other folks. And then the Chicano movement was a big deal.
Can we talk about this?
I'm getting to that because
Okay.
I was part of the Chicano movement and the anti-war movement and all of these other kinds of things as well. And so I started publishing the newspaper, Sal Si Puedes. So, and it covered a lot of different things. I noticed that a lot of people were hungry for media. We had been excluded from media, very little to see of Latinos in any way, shape, or form. So, and people were so hungry. We published this. It was bilingual. So it covered, it covered the union. Back on this one, this is February in 1971.
71.
There was a big article on the United Farm Workers Organizing Committee suing the Department of Defense because they were spending so much more money on buying from scab products, about $2.50 more per crate than they would have had they bought union label. There are very few union labels, but they're spending so much money. So the union sued them. And this is fascinating. But there's also articles on the movement, anti-war, all of the kinds of things of that day. So it was a combination of things. And so we take them to schools, spread them out. People were dying to get them. We put them in stores. We had some sponsors, put them in stores. And so it was well received. I wish I had a greater marketing background when I was younger, but nevertheless, it was very well received.
And it's a lot of pages. I'll tell you, it's 12 pages, and Jorge wrote it all and apparently typed it. I mean, this is before
I did
computers.
not type it.
Oh, you did not type it.
We had a team of people, and then I had an associate editor, Susana Manriquez, that was great. And then after I left Santa Barbara, she continued publishing another newspaper called Chilam Balam. But I had a great team of people helping, and however they might. So
we have these also in the exhibit. And actually, as you're talking, I think we'll digitize some of those articles so people can see the kinds of things that you were writing about in 1971. We'll absolutely do that one. All right, so I have another photo here locally, and then, or a couple of photos. Actually, I think, why don't we switch and talk about Agbayani Village? Because I just love this story. I think it's so incredible.
That's an interesting one.
So we have a lot of photos here on the walls, but we chose a couple of them today to talk about.
You can see we started construction of this from the ground up. What happened was after the strikes, a lot of Filipinos involved in the initial strikes, and they were thrown out. They're old. They came over like in the 1930s. So they were pretty old and beat up and they had no place to go.
And weren't allowed to marry.
And they weren't allowed to marry. A few of them married Mexicans, but most of them were single and homeless and didn't have any money. So Cesar said they're going to die with dignity and respect. So the union headquarters was at 40 acres in Delano. So he gave us the land to build that. Any volunteers, the union bought all the materials. So it was built with volunteer labor, but there were some very skilled construction folks there. There's some pictures on the exhibit here of people working on the construction of Agbayani Village. And I recruited some students, UCSB, and some longshoremen from here in Oxnard, and different folks, different volunteers to go and work on there. So it was a lot of fun. Very hot, of course, but a lot of fun. Let me see that picture one more time, if I may.
Of course, it's your picture.
Here's a couple of old timers here. The fellow on the left here, Manuel Venegas from Santa Paula, and old activist and active with the farm workers. Another old activist, Phil Wu, is there, a student and an activist in those days as well. You see the construction of it going up, and just to give them a measure of recognition, because we certainly appreciate their work. And then, when I moved, I went to graduate school back on the East Coast. And then when I got so tired of the cold weather in Boston, so one day I saw this job application for Cal State University of Fresno, and I took a job there. It enabled me to continue to work with the union, and I sent students down there. Here's a couple of students of mine with Philip Veracruz, the vice president of the UFW. And this is looks like the complete Agbayani Village. You can see is a really very nice retirement home. The Manongs, the Filipinos, the Manongs, they loved it. They had a great deal because they planted their gardens. There was a clinic there. The union had the clinic there as well. So if you're retiring and you have these things, it's terrific. So they all died with dignity and respect at this retirement village.
And that's where the Cesar Chavez monument is now, right?
I think it's in Keene, because they moved their headquarters to Keene up into the Tehachapi's. So I believe the monument is there now.
And so you can go visit that.
Yes, indeed. There's a library and everything there, a photo exhibit as well.
Okay, so you talked about, you went to graduate school in the East Coast, Brandeis, in Boston. And while you were there, your UFW, or again, burgeoning UFW colleagues in the fight came to you again. So why don't you tell us about what is going on in this photo?
Certainly so. A&P Supermarkets was the largest chain in the nation. They were the largest buyer of scab produce. So there was a boycott there. And what's interesting is during this time, a lot of the farm workers had the heart and soul. They spread out to different cities across the nation, even in Canada, to work on the boycott. And a few in Boston. Nevertheless, when I was in school at Brandeis University, I organized the students to picket on the weekends against A&P. And so we did that for about 3 years. But the great news was about 1975, we beat A&P. There were a lot of marches. Cesar would come to town and Dolores would come to town. And there are a lot of photos in the exhibit. Here he is marching in Boston. We're going to A&P headquarters to bring attention to the boycott. This is his brother, Richard Chavez here. And there's Cesar. And marching in Boston, and farm workers that came with them. We were marching in Boston. There were enormous pictures. There's some that you have that show the really enormous people that joined those marches. But we beat them. And once A&P falls, the other largest chains, they fell as well because they didn't want to be the next target of a boycott. So we received, we almost beat them all together when we beat A&P, and the union never had so many contracts as during that time. So that was an enormous victory. But we'd have these, incredible marches. Cesar would come there, Dolores would come there, and we'd have big fundraisers in Harvard Square and things such as this. Play some music, whatever it took to raise money to keep the boycott organizing, and So in the cold, in the cold and the rain and the snow, we're out there keeping people away from boycott, our best anyway.
Which I know you hated. You did not like the cold, isn't that
Oh,
right?
I hated the cold. I hated the cold. It was a cold place. And then when I saw this advertisement for Cal State University of Fresno, and I had organized in Fresno, I said, "It's plenty hot there. Let me have this place." They flew me out and hired me right away. So I went. I was teaching there, and the good thing is, it's an agricultural area, so the growers did not want anything to do with the union or UFW. Cesar Chavez, the students wanted to bring Cesar Chavez to the campus, and administration said, "No way, not a chance." So I was elected as vice president of the United Professors of California, and we brought Cesar to the campus, a really tumultuous time and so forth. And we brought him, and he was a tremendous hit with the students. And, he took questions from everyone and so forth. And it was a big hit, even for the hard right people that were protesting, wanting to start a fight. They asked him questions, but Cesar was so calm and so reserved and answered their questions. And so kept things at peace. But that was a big victory. That happened about 1976.
Can you describe what he was like as a person?
Oh, just the greatest leader with the greatest integrity. He was so likable. You liked him because he had the integrity. He was so selfless person. You could see that. He never wanted anything for himself, ever. And he worked day and night. He traveled, and usually in a station wagon throughout California, just an old beat up station wagon. That was it. And then when he traveled abroad, after I left Fresno, I moved to Washington, D.C. I was doing national advocacy work there. But Cesar would come to town. He'd meet with me, occasionally stay with me, and get brought up to date on policy issues that impacted rural America and the farm workers as well. And I was doing stuff on a national basis, including rural America, which was not giving much attention ever in any aspect. Only the large corporations, large growers got attention. So we picked things apart and did a lot for working class people, and throughout the entire nation. Deep South, Northeast, the whole country, the reservations as well.
Mhm.
So, and got money distributed throughout the nation, healthcare, housing, weatherizations, all of these kinds of things. So that was great. So connected with Cesar there, continued the relationship with him. And so it was a very long relation and good relationship.
I want to get back to, I think I want to get back to Ventura a little bit. When you were a kid, right, you were a teenager and you were working, involved in all this and documenting it all by photo. And the way you talk about it sounds very, very exciting. But it was also scary. I know. I mean, there's some photos of, there was law enforcement and everything. So how do you remember that time? How would you describe that time?
Well, I'll tell you, I have the greatest confidence in these people because they're so courageous. Because you go on the strike lines and you get people that are getting beat up, some growers throughout the state hire Hell's Angels, real thugs to go and people up, and these are middle-aged, old people, young people, men and women and so forth, to see them get up and continue the strike after getting the crap beaten out of them. What greater courage could you find? They were not armed people. They were not people of force. They were poor people. And to see that courage, and then, to live with them, see, they're also the generosity. They didn't have much, but they were the most generous people. So, like I said, each day I just internalized these people as where I needed to be, what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be. So I always continued on these kinds of struggles in any capacity that I could. And later in life, I became an advocate. I could see the bigger picture on a national scale and continue to serve working class middle America and these kinds of things as well.
And I know that you're still working, but one of the most notable things that you've done recently was you created the Latino Chamber of Commerce, is that right?
Yes,
In
yes.
LA,
Yes, I did.
which is a really interesting model, actually. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit
Well,
about
I'll
that.
tell you, it was, I started a business because I needed to find a way to make a living and subsidize all my advocacy because that was my passion. And so I've had a reasonable measure of success, but I belong to chambers and I continue to do advocacy since I had picked up a good means of doing advocacy work in Washington, D.C. So I just continued in any capacity that I was in. And the chambers are generally not not very political animals. They don't analyze politics. Occasionally, corporations would get angry with them because they felt that I was hurting them, and so they did complain at me about the advocacy that I was doing, but they didn't know how to stop me. So I continued. But what I did was I thought the best way, why don't we organize a little bit more progressive chamber of commerce and organized Latino Business Chamber of Greater Los Angeles in 2008. Started in 2007, but it became, and we organized around real technical assistance in English and in Spanish, but bona fide technical assistance, hired, technical assistance folks. It was the real deal. So people joined, they renewed. Most chambers, they sign you up once and you're a member forever, but they don't. But we had people renewing because there was a real value there. Because I had lobbied in DC for nationwide funds for technical assistance, corporate spend philanthropic dollars for technical assistance. And so it was a great example. People didn't really pursue it much outside of ourselves, but we did a great job. We opened a high-tech center, the whole darn thing, English and Spanish. We had key people. And so the chamber did well, outpaced all the other chambers. In 2013, I took ill and then I needed to take care of my mother as well. So I had to leave it behind. And just over a short period of time, it became kind of a regular chamber. They withdrew the technical assistance and, became a kind of also ran Chamber of Commerce. But while it lasted, it was pretty progressive. And I was doing a great deal of advocacy in Washington, D.C., a great deal. And the board entirely supported what I was doing, which was terrific. So I was carrying the weight for not just Latino business, minority business, all small businesses, because I advocated on behalf of all small businesses, inclusive of women, inclusive of, veterans, inclusive of disabled, minority, all of these things, all small business, and, attack corporations with their own data. The key was attacking the corporations with their own data, because you can find the illogic, even criminality there, and meet with the major regulators. So I'm not bullshitting. I'm telling them the honest truth. It's in front of everyone. I can show them up. I had credibility because I never made things up. I was an advocate, but I did it with hard facts. And the regulators were as supportive as they could be of any advocate, because they were never advocates. But the banks and the financial institutions knew what was going on. They didn't like me, but they respected me. And so I did this for several years and with great effect, and got to end up working with some great people. Len Canty with the Black Economic Council up in Oakland. We became really close friends. We did a good 1-2 punch. And then, some other folks that were really great, Saeed Ali, Bob Ganeza, and this, we could think is that, they were also advocates, but we could think outside the box and generate so much on a major level. We used to meet not with just legislators, but with the top regulators, the chairman of the Federal Reserve and all the governors, chairwoman of the federal FDIC and all those governors, the comptroller of the currency. This was good, but no bullshit, no lies, not advocacy, just hard facts.
Well, you're good at making connections. I think we've seen that kind of throughout your life and your history. I want to find out if we have a lot of questions, because I can stop and we can take some. Denise, if you have a read on that.
I think we can continue, and then why don't we go for another 10 minutes and then go to Q&A?
Okay, great. I wanted to ask you, I have a couple of other photos here from Ventura County, and I would like you to just tell us what's going on, because I know some of the people in the audience will remember
Oh, indeed.
these times.
Yeah, this is one of the March This is the beginning of one of our marches here in Oxnard. You know, we did a few of them, but this is Chuy Villegas. He was one of the original organizers of the United Farm Workers Office. We have a picture of him over there, but him and Lorenzo in the wheelchair were the original, volunteers. This is old friend David Betancourt. He passed away some years ago. Just a volunteer on the march as a monitor. And this is the Oxnard Boulevard, so that's quite a treat.
Do you remember when this was?
Ooh, it had to be probably around, I don't know, 69. It's hard to remember the actual dates, but
Well, we can see by these pants. We know it was around 69.
oh yeah, by the bell bottom. All right, all
Bell
right.
bottoms. Okay, and then this.
That's a strike in Oxnard. This is just some strikers, boycotters. Don't shop at Safeway. They were a big chain out here that we were, asking people not to shop there because they were buying a lot of scab produce. And so we got a few other pictures in the exhibit with some other folks, local folks on strike as well.
So were you, like this day, were you there working with the union, or were you just driving around taking some pictures?
I can't remember anymore. To be honest, I just can't remember. Like some of the other photos, I know some people really well, so I was there.
Yeah, right.
Because I know I was there. So,
Right. So that's one of the questions I want to ask you about. During the pandemic, we at the museum did a few little pieces on our website about ways to capture your family history and to document your family and everything. And this is a treasure trove. When you were taking these pictures, did you ever think that they would turn into anything like this, or did you just take them for yourself?
I took them for myself. And then when I was doing the newspaper, I was looking at any potential that they might have. Not that we put a great deal of pictures in the newspaper because it becomes a little more expensive, but I just had it with it. And since I started taking them, it just became a habit of mine. So I have some interesting pictures of the different movements as well, because I was involved in not just this movement, but other movements as well, different marches and protests and things such as that, a great deal. That's why some other institutions have an interest in my archives, because they are interested in some of the other aspects as well. And so I just had that camera, and it's just part of what I did. I just learned to do it, and it was great for me to see what I had lived and what I had experienced. So I never ever thought that there'd be something like this that people would have that great an interest. Even when we did this, I thought, well, my family, my best friends will come, and maybe a few old activists would be here and so forth. But I'm really shocked that the turnout has been so good.
And we had 350 people at the
opening.
So I know from talking to the curators that you didn't really do anything to conserve or take care of these photos, right? They were just stuck in albums.
Yeah, or boxes, or just thrown in boxes with papers and things such as that.
Would you do it differently if you knew that these were going to be up on a museum wall?
Yeah, but who's going to know that? Who's going to know that?
Well, I'm trying to tell everybody out there that their photos may be on a museum wall, and ask them to use archival paper when you put them in the album.
Yes, indeed, because they were when the curators saw them, I said, these are going to become destroyed. So we had to do something immediately. So, well, I'm glad they did, and I'm glad they're here, and I'm glad people can appreciate this bit of experience.
Yeah, and I'll use it as a pitch actually also. So, I work at the Museum of Ventura County, and we are the Museum of History and Art and Agriculture here, and we are the official repository of the history of our county. And probably those of you out in the audience are listening either because you know Jorge, or because you live in Ventura County or did live in Ventura County. And all of it is really remarkable to see how a snapshot, not even like this, just a snapshot from a birthday party, can tell us so much about our history. So I encourage all of you to be looking at your pictures and even bringing them in, and we can take a look at them, and we can extrapolate from what you have documented. We all have a museum in our own homes, right? You had a museum in your own home that was stuck in boxes.
Yes.
It's now
indeed.
out. So
I'm still opening those boxes, believe me.
Yeah, we could do a lot more exhibits probably. So I've never asked you this before, but given it's so interesting, we put up this exhibit it was originally supposed to open on March 14th of 2020. And we decided on March 13th, actually before the shutdown order went into effect, to not hold the opening, and then it never opened. And then we went into the pandemic and the shutdown. And then you saw a summer of protests and outcry about racial injustice. And you had been through all of this. What did you draw any parallels between what is happening now and what it was like in the 60s and 70s?
Yes, indeed. Because I'll tell you, it's not surprising to me because it's always existed. Even my father was born in 1916. He told me, you have to be cautious because, who you trust, because it's not always the way that it seems. And so I could see this. And then like in the case there, I have some old publications from these days, and there's the White Power publication there as well. So those folks were active.
Which is here. Yeah.
Right
we
in there.
have it,
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
in the exhibit.
And the Klan has been active in a lot of places and so forth. So it's never disappeared. So these groups are forming, and it's difficult to say, but the Republican Party has become so concentrated on a racial basis, and so much voter suppression, targeting people of color. And this is nothing new. So, we must be prepared and not let our guard down that we're citizens, we belong here, we participate, and we don't let anybody violate our constitutional rights, because that's essentially what they're doing. So we've got, write letters to the editor, we've got to, step into it wherever we may need to. So let me say, this is a call for people to step up, however young or old, we need to step up, because these like the January 6th riots is not over, and there are a lot of calls for more protests. And so we have to show that we're strong and not humble. We're not farm workers and not going to be abused, exploited as they were in the past. And perhaps some are still today. So that's a call to arms, so to speak.
Great. All right, now I am going to ask Denise about questions, because I know that there are some out there and I would love to hear them.
There sure are. And you've got some really, some great friends who are just saying hello, Jorge. I want you to know that they've tuned in. Diana Miranda, Marlene Head, and Daniel Rosas DiCanini all say hi. They're just, there you go. Diana Miranda wants to know, how did your parents feel? How did they react when you, as a young teenager, were getting kind of headfirst into this this new movement? What were their thoughts? You talked a little bit about your dad.
Well, I didn't tell them. They knew I was involved. Of course, they're concerned for my safety all the time. So the less I said it was better. And I could talk to my father a little more easily, but still not too much, because their concern for safety was first and foremost. And, it was a tumultuous time. There were a lot of fighting going on and shootings and things like that, no matter where it was. So I said very little to them at the time. Not until even later in life did I tell them a little bit.
So then Linda Terrazas, who was came to see the exhibit this summer, I was just wanting to comment that she was a teen, a full-time volunteer in Delano from 66 to 71 when she wasn't in school. And it was great to see all the memories of her time working with the farm workers and really to relive the struggle. And she wants to thank you for educating people about La Causa, because there are whole generations who aren't aware, who are alive today, that didn't know that this time existed. And then Isel Longoria wants to know what advice, maybe expand a little bit on advice you would give to younger generation of Latinos who continue to see farm worker injustices and feel helpless. How can they take action?
All right, let's see. There are two parts. So Linda, thanks for your work as a teenager, because it was so important, because it took anybody and everybody to be involved. And thank you for coming to the opening. And this is an interesting story. I had a group that organized some old farm workers and their families to come and see the exhibit a couple of 3 Saturdays ago. And they expected about 40 folks to come on a tour. Of course, I'm always ready to assist, farm workers, students, anybody. And 61 people came. It was incredible. They were shocked. The people that organized it couldn't believe it. Their eyes were wide open. They could not believe, their lives and their work was featured in an institution. They were so proud that to see themselves or their fellow workers on an institutional walls, because most of them had never been to a museum before. So it was a shocker and an extraordinary treat. So thank you, Elena, for having this exhibit, because so many people are coming that had not been there. And okay, now the second part is what advice might I have for students is to get involved. It's always about organization, because it's one thing to be an individual and do things, but when you organize, you get more done. So what I'm asking students to be are leaders. We have very few leaders these days. Very few communities have any leaders these days. It's not like in those days. We need you to step up, take accountability for what you stand for, what you represent, and be leaders, and talk to other people about what you can do. Use your creative imaginativeness. You'll always find ways. Find local organizations from which to start with, and then move up the ladder. Work your way up for farm workers to Teresa Romero, who's the new president of the United Farm Workers Union. But start locally, maybe with the community organizations, Ventura County Community Foundation, the museum, the MICA, the Mixteco group. They need organization. They need assistance. They need technical assistance. So the students can do so many of these things. Use your creative imaginativeness, organize, and keep the engine rolling.
Great. So here's a quick question about the role that women played, and maybe a little bit about your work with Dolores Huerta. I know we had a conversation last September between the two of you on a Zoom program, but maybe you could talk a little bit about your working with Dolores.
Well, Dolores is a real warrior, a real fighter, and she still does it today. Not just Dolores, but the women in the struggle were valiant and warriors, and they marched and they struck. They came out and they suffered like all the rest. They took their beating. So no difference. I couldn't see any difference. Dolores was a leader, so she worked all those hours, volunteers, no pay, same as Cesar. So these were leaders. Philip Veracruz, real leaders. Their hearts and souls were in it. And what can you say about that? But they were just true leaders. They deserved whatever honors that they get these days. But all the women, just like all the men, they all went through the same thing. The union could not win without them. It doesn't matter on the strike lines, on the picket lines, they're always there. So we were unified, we were together. And for the students today, we're unified, we're together. Every mind counts, every body counts, every arm counts, every leg counts. So we need all the people that have a similar mentality to work together.
There are a lot of women in this exhibit. I don't feel like some of the photos that I chose really feature it, but there are a lot of photos of women involved in marching.
A lot of Dolores and others as well. Yes, indeed.
So a couple more call outs, just people saying hello to you, Jorge. So Daniel and Mary De Jesus Rosas from Texas are tuning in. They want to say hello and thank you for your passion to perpetuate these historical facts. Betsy Preciado is on and is thanking you for the presentation and how valuable this is for students and relatives. And right now, that concludes the questions I have in the queue. So Elena, if you want to take it from here, and I'll bring any other questions forward as I come in.
I think I just have one follow-up question to what you said. So you talked about leaders. You said there aren't as many leaders. And again, I'm putting you on the spot here. What do you think is different now from what it was back then when it seems like there were more leaders? Is that just hindsight that makes you feel that way?
No. I'm always looking. I mean, if I see a leader, I do anything I can, to bring them here or to talk with them. That's what I've done in the past. If I find somebody, how can I be of assistance to be a leader? Like a lot of the older folks, like myself, are retired or quasi-retired, but we still have that energy. We still have that passion in us. And there's always something you can do at any age. And we need to build leadership. We're our people on the whole scheme of things. Are we still being misrepresented? Amazing. Look here in Ventura County, all the farm workers are Mexicanos. Some are undocumented. So do they need technical assistance? So it's about people. Young people need to own up. And when I was young, I owned up. I went to work there. I saw that and saw the humiliation and dehumanization, and you internalize this. You do what you can do because they're the most generous and most courageous people that you can find. So find the means, and you just have to step up. But people just don't think they're possible. When you talk to younger people, they don't think it's possible. No leaders. I was no leader. I was some hick kid from Moore Park. You know what I mean? No leader. Just got some passion. All you need is passion. I'll take a person with passion over intelligence or anything any day. If you have the passion, it gets done.
It's interesting. I think one of the many things that's so impressive about you is your kind of lessons are just go do it, right? And that there are a lot of places that you can go. And I think a lot of us feel kind of helpless and don't quite know what to do when facing what seem like intractable problems like climate change and food insecurity and the growing divide between the classes. And so I loved that you listed, My Cop, El Centrito is one, Cause is an organization where anybody can get involved at any age. I do want to say for some of you out there who are interested in supporting monetarily, the Ventura County Community Foundation has a fund that actually my mother was instrumental in creating, the Farm Worker Housing Fund, which has really been a lifesaver, literally. And so that there are a lot of places that we can get our foot in the door on the way to leadership. And also, you had this lesson in being a leader when you were a kid. I keep on talking about you when you were a kid because you're so not a kid now. But really, anybody can do this at any time, right? Really get involved.
That's correct. That's correct. You have to generate that passion, and it just comes to you. And you don't think about right or wrong. You just do what's good, what's right, what feels right, and develop a consciousness. That's the bottom line.
Well, Jorge, it's really, you are very, I always learn a lot when I talk to you. I feel very lucky that I get to talk to Jorge so much. By the way, he will be here Thursday and Friday, right? You're bringing people by the exhibit?
This Thursday and then next Thursday and Friday
next
as well.
Thursday, this Thursday and next Thursday. If any of you want to come, like from Texas or San Jose or wherever, and come and chat with Jorge. And I really want to thank you for letting us bring this story in such a real and raw way to a lot of people who didn't know it before. And the exhibit is up until October 31st. The museum here in Ventura and the Agriculture Museum is open Thursdays to Sundays, 11 to 5 p.m. And thank you and thank all of you for being with us.
Thank you, Elena.